burgeon of new forms of racism in the aftermath of September 11th, and under the pretext of the so-called war against terror, reflects the visible rise of contemporary manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, and xenophobia throughout the world, and especially against Muslims.
There should be a chapter in this document with regards to populations under foreign occupation.
Azerbaijan also notes with great concern the plight of people under foreign occupation, which is in most cases the victims of racism and racial discrimination.
I now give the floor to the representatives of the organization United Nations Watch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our debate today on racism and the Durban Declaration follows the commemoration of 40 years since the assassination of the Reverend Martin Luther King. It's a time to reflect upon historic principles. Principles like one person, one vote. Today, that sounds obvious. But 5 decades ago, in parts of the United States, this basic principle of democracy, equality, and human rights was not obvious at all. For no reason other than the color of their skin, many African Americans were denied the right to have their votes count equally. During that difficult time, there was a young attorney in the state of Georgia who saw the mistreatment of his fellow citizens. Marching arm in arm with Dr. King, he decided to challenge racial injustice all the way to the Supreme Court. Thanks to his arguments, in the 1963 landmark case of Gray versus Saunders, the court declared, one person, one vote. The young activist's name was Morris B. Abram. He went on to head the United Negro College Fund and to serve as U.S. representative to the predecessor body of this council. 15 years ago, guided by the same vision of human rights and equality, he founded United Nations Watch, which remains outspoken in protecting victims of racism and intolerance around the world. Mr. President, it is with this legacy and with these principles that we approach the Durban Review Conference on Racism, now set for next April in Geneva. Durban Review must reject the unacceptable elements that marred the 2001 conference. It cannot once again be turned into a paradox, into a platform for racist hatred and anti-Semitism, nor misuse human rights terminology in regards to the Arab-Israeli conflict. There are worrying signs. Despite objective approval by the Secretariat, the preparatory committee refused to accredit a respected Canadian Jewish NGO. This resulted from frivolous objections by Iran, which sought to deflect attention from its mistreatment of minorities as condemned by the General Assembly, and from the racist policy of its leaders condemned by this Council's expert on racism and the international community. Yet the committee readily welcomed another group, whose very name, the quote, Palestinian Grassroots Anti-Apartheid Wall Campaign, brings back the hateful and divisive rhetoric of 2001. Most worrying of all, however, is the recent non-paper, an early blueprint for the 2009 declaration. In 2 separate provisions, this document already singles out one member state, Israel, falsely implying that the Arab-Israeli conflict is one of race. It is not. Mr. President, we believe this document, the non-paper, breaches the red lines established by concerned governments and human rights organizations. Unless we see emergent remedial action, Durban Review is in danger of becoming little more than Durban 2. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
I would like to know if there are any delegations that request the floor in the exercise of the right of reply. I recognize the Islamic Republic of Iran. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. In exercising right of reply with regard to the references and allegations made by the UN Watch this morning under Agenda Item 9 concerning the accreditation of one NGO to the Durban review process, my delegation would like, for the sake of clarity, to state the following. First of all, I should reiterate that we fully support active participation of civil society, in particular non-governmental organizations, in Durban review process. Secondly, as the distinguished members of the Council are well aware, we have already established within the framework of the PrepCom for Durban Review Conference certain rules and procedures to regulate the accreditation and participation of NGOs in the process. The said NGO, which was mentioned in the statement by UN Watch this morning, was, as a matter of fact, a corporation without consultative status with ECOSOC. We acted in full compliance with the established rules of procedure, particularly the content of the Decision 1/1 of the PrepCom, which provides the Member States with the legitimate right to submit comments and questions on any of the applications for accreditations by NGO, as well as the provisions of the paragraph 44B of the ECOSOC Resolution 1996/31. Accordingly, and as a matter of procedure, we raised some specific and clear questions and issues to be answered by the said NGO. Unfortunately, the said NGO failed to answer to those questions and finally decided to withdraw its application for accreditation. I should also reiterate that we showed our utmost flexibility during the course of consideration of the said NGO accreditation. It is regrettable that the UN Watch, while misinforming the Council, tries to resort to blame game and distortion of realities on the ground. I thank you, Mr. President.